Are you ready for a project that is way easier than it looks? Well, I've got the perfect one for you today. Let's get started. Yes, that is correct. If you've been following my career, you do think you recognize this quilt from when I was on Man Sewing and Jenny Doan and I did the project we called the Three Dudes Modified, which was originally stolen from my good friend Raymond Steves. And he was part of the Three Dudes Quilt Shop in Phoenix, Arizona, and is now part of 35th Avenue. So in back at Phoenix, Arizona, where I did a trunk show, before all of this COVID thing happened. And so anyways, it's always fun to remodify a pattern, and there are a few changes, but if you do know my Three Dudes Modified pattern well, you know this is gonna be easy and awesome, but it's even easier than the original because there's not as many strips. And the thing I'm most excited about today's project is our incredible variegated fabrics from Michael Miller. By the way, welcome everybody. I am Rob Appell from Michael Miller Fabrics, National Sales Manager and clown with a couple of video cameras, and I have a blast doing these tutorials here at making it fun for all of you. Try to put out a video once a week, usually on Wednesdays. We'll see what happens next week, who knows? Now, the thing I am pumped up about the most, we've got 8 colors, and this is the Ombre border, part of our Quintessentials line, which is building in our basics products that we do. Now, ombres are variegated, or fabrics that change color or have a gradient, we'll call it. Now, what I love about ours is, check it out. That's right, you're seeing the huge, and it's kind of a mess when I do this, but I'm gonna do it anyways real quick, and I'll show you all the colors. But is that incredible? So that's the #1 best feature, is you get all of the color range, where a lot of other variegated fabrics actually double back at the fold, so you don't get nearly as much color gradient, which makes this way more functional, especially in strips like we'll be using today. The other thing is, look at that bling. Yes, we have a metallic on here, and it's just fantastic. Maybe you can see in the overhead camera a little bit better. These are some of the blocks we'll be making very shortly, but you can hopefully see the beautiful metallic there. So let's blow through these colors real quick. I'll just kind of do this so you can kind of see the color gradient, because we're going to be working in the entire gray family today. And so I just want you to see the other 7 beautiful colors, making the total of 8 beautiful colors that are available. And I have to say, I'm a sucker for this one and the next green that is coming. Look at that beautiful color range there in this aqua color. And I'm sorry, I haven't even memorized the names. I'm terrible. I am terrible. This one, though, I do love, and I believe this one's called Jade. And oops, I didn't, there, this is what I'm trying to show you. Look at that amazing color range. I am so excited about that. And these have already shipped out to your local quilt shop, so you should be able to find these. Maybe they have them on their website if you're checking in advance under Quintessentials. If not, it's under Ombre Border or Making It Fun, Michael Miller. Isn't that awesome there? And then we have these 2 really neat earth tones, which I love. How neat, and especially if you're doing different tones of mountains and different stuff. I just love this one here. And then I should say, last but not least, what we'll be working with today is this amazing gray shade. So you see the dark there, it goes all the way down to this light. And we're gonna use this almost to look like 3 different fabrics as we work. So let me get you Let me get you set up for all of that as we get started here. Now, I like to know where I'm going as a maker, so we're gonna go backwards today. Here are the individual block units. We're going to make the same block, but you're gonna be thinking in groups of light, medium, and dark. So you have a light grouping, a medium grouping, and a dark grouping, and these squares actually came from starting originally with a strip like this that I then just added in our awesome solid jet black, or you could use our cotton couture black. Either one, they're both incredible high density, deep dark dyed blacks. I'm excited I can't talk today, sorry gang. Now, as a moment ago I was mentioning, this is a slight variation from the other variation of the Three Dudes, because the original pattern had 3 different strips in here in different colors. Well, in this particular project, we're using the same 2 fabrics. We're using the variegated gray, this ombre border in gray, and we're using the solid black. That's all we need, is just 2 colors for this project, right? And that's what's gonna make it super easy and, like I said, a pretty cool thing. I've wanted to try this quilt for a long time with variegateds, and I'm pumped up about about it. Drop into the description below, follow the link on over. I have a beautiful free pattern here with just some quick cutting instructions, I should call it, more cutting information. But in case I'm going a little too fast, because I'm always so caffeinated, you can print this out, keep it next to your sewing machine in your cutting station, and you'll know what we're working on here. So that being said, let me go ahead and keep these organized. We're gonna need them in a few minutes when we get onto the design wall. And I'm gonna go ahead and get my strips ready to lay out here and point out what we have going on. So for every strip set row, and in case you're thinking of different colors, I will give you the information for both. We need 2 identical strip set rows, and you need 3 groupings. So technically we're gonna make 6 strip set rows. Where'd that dang thing go? Here, this is a strip set row. Right? The whole thing. So you need 6 of these. I'm going to make 6 identical versions of this, but technically you could make it with, let's say, 3 colors, and in that case you would make 2 of each, because I'm going to need you to match back up the lights to the lights, the mediums to the mediums, and the darks to the darks. So that being said, for every 1 row you need 1 of these wide strips here, and this wide strip is 5 inches cut. It's cut raw at 5 inches on the table right now before we get started. All of the black strips, or all of our solid strips, are always 1.5 inches, and you need 4 for every strip set row. So I've got a bunch of these pre-made already. And then what falls in between those are the 2.5. So for every strip set row, you will need 2.5 of these. And as you're dry fitting them, just making sure that the orientation is going to be the same for all of the rows, meaning that the darks are on one side and the lights are on the other. Now for me, the light is where I wanted to start cutting, because at the end, when it's all said and done, we're gonna have these remnants of the strip set rows after making the block units. And from here, we can actually make our borders. And I like to have a darker border around the center, brighter portion of my quilt, because I believe that brings the eye into the center and keeps the audience more entertained with the project itself. A little art trick 101 there for you. So we're gonna work from the light side for making blocks, working to save the dark side for making borders down the road. That's a little design extra bonus for all of you today. So that being said, I'm gonna sew from the light side, and we're gonna break grandmother's rule today. We're not gonna go up one way and down the other and all of this kind of like back and forth stuff. We are gonna sew all in one direction. And one of the things I do, and I haven't done it, so I'm just gonna look over here and do it. Oh, beep, 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 stop. Is I'm going to reduce my stitch length. Almost said seam allowance like I did in the last video, better edit that out. Stitch length to a 2.0. I want the machine doing the work for me. I don't want it pulling extra, because I want to make sure that I don't get a bunch of wave or veering in my strips when I'm done. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to start here with pieces 1, a black strip, and piece 2, one of the narrow variegated strips. With the light color in my fingers, I'm just going to lay these together selvage to selvage. I've already made sure they're both about the same length. I'm going to come on over here to my presser foot, and I am sewing with the second strip in my line of sight. So I've actually got the bigger one on top of the smaller one right now, but for just these 2, it's not going to matter. And then I'm going to keep a nice even little pace, letting the sewing machine do all the work up against that 1/4 inch seam allowance, that little 1/4 inch edge guide. And we are literally just going to go so nice and slow through this all the way to the end. We do not need to be in a rush. Just keep a nice, even little pace. And here we are to the other end. Nice little matchup, nice little lineup. Now, as we come off of the machine, I want to have myself nice and organized in my ironing space so I can iron out this whole strip. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to iron also into the new work. So if this is piece number 2 that I'm looking at on the top, because piece number 1 was down below, I'm going to press and I'm just going to run my iron along that edge to set the seam. And I know that a lot of us really enjoy the seated sewing kind of assembly line mantra. And you can even do these kind of as a chain piecing. You could do each section at a time like this. But what I really want you to hear me say right now is I want you to press after every seam. I've done this both ways. And if you take the time to press between every seam, you'll get a much nicer, much more crisp, straight seam allowance, and you'll keep the veer out of your strip set row. We're going to really want these to look awesome when we're done. So I'm just going to take the time and I'm literally going to stitch on and press over. And now, like I said, I've done strip 1, strip 2. Here's strip 3. So I'm just going to grab this and I'm just going to line it right up and I'm just going to continue on sewing until this entire strip set row is done. It's going to take me a few minutes, so I'll be right back with that completed and then show you how to make your squares into the next unit blocks. So stay tuned, I'll be right back. Didn't take as long as I expected, even with the fun little transition in there. I now have the other strip set made. And what I really want to encourage you to do, even though you see me with squares already on the table, that's just for the magic of television. The best way to handle this project and to make sure Murphy does not come into your sewing room and hand you your seam ripper is to do all of your strip sets first before you cut anything, because what we're going to do to figure out the size of our squares, because believe it or not, we all have a different size 1/4 inch. How does that happen anyways? So I'm going to stack all of them up, make sure that they're all the exact same width this way, and then I'm going to take out a ruler and I'm going to measure from the bottom all the way up to the top edge, and the ones I've got done, as well as these ones right here, happen to be 12 1/4. But don't take my math for that. Do exactly what I just did. Measure from the bottom edge up to the top edge, nice and straight, and whatever is that height, we're gonna now make squares out of it. I also do not want you to cut more than one at a time, because I really want you to keep these things straight, and we can make some nice slight little adjustments as we go through. So this is how I handle it. I'm going to first take and just address it nice. And I'm going to come over here because, like I mentioned earlier, we want to start from our light sides. So as I come through here, I'm actually looking at this strip here, this strip here, this strip here. And if I have to do any slight adjustments or tweaks, I do that to begin with because I want both edges to really read nice and square. I'm going to cut off this edge this way, right at the top of the selvages, right? Save that for later because it says Michael Miller on it. Awesome. Okay. Then I'm going to take the entire strip, I'm going to rotate it around and prepare now to make these 12 1/4 inch cuts for myself. Now yours will be pretty dang close to that measure, but I can't guarantee they'll be exact. So to do that, I'm going to come over here to this end here, set my 12 1/4 marker from my square ruler so that first the line runs nice and perpendicular, I guess, or running right underneath my line marker on the 12 1/4. Now, once again, I'm checking all of my strips to make sure that nothing's going really cattywampus at this point, making sure everything looks really nice. And then I'm going to take the time to slowly and accurately cut one square there, slide it over, and because we are dealing with a gradient, I would like you to keep these in order as well, lights, mediums, and darks. Find your 12 1/4 or whatever your personal measurement is. Make sure everything lines up really nicely within. Make yourself another cut. If for some reason this were to get skewed, it's wiser, and we do have enough to fix it and then come back and make sure that you have nice, clean cuts on both sides. And the last cut here, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll set this aside for the borders, but I want to show you how to get your really cool block units made. So then what I did is I looked at this, and you can see there's a density to our awesome metallic triangles in the gradient itself. More dense, and they get less dense as they head towards the other side, or I guess I should say towards the center, and then on the other side they're dense again. So right now this is the dense, or this is the bright side, and it's nice and low on my block, and I'm going to set all of my blocks up just that way so that I've got the bright side low. And then when I grab the matching unit, this is the same one, right? Same shades, not the medium, not the dark. I like to go with my light side on the right side because it rhymes and I can remember it. In doing this, what I want you to really notice is look at my seams, right? I'm going to run them perpendicular or in the opposite directions of each other. I've got these beautiful perfect squares, and now I'm going to sew myself into a pickle. Watch this. I'm going to take my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to head right back on over to the machine, and I'm going to do just that. I'm going to start at one edge, and this is the toughest edge because I've got the folds from earlier heading in the wrong direction. So now I'm just going to use my fingernail to just push those under. And then, just like you got a base hit on softball night, I want you to run or sew right through that corner. You can lift your presser foot, make your rotation, make sure everything's lined up underneath. Drop the presser foot again and keep on sewing. I don't want you to guess the pivot point. I want you to sew off the edge. We're going to do this all the way around. You're probably noticing that I'm putting a little pressure down here, and I also like to keep pressure on the opposite corner from where I started. That helps keep this little weird pucker that can try to develop on the last run out of the way. Another base hit, rotate, and keep on sewing. That's why I love a needle down function. Making sure everything lines up and isn't getting cattywampus in there. And we're right back where we started at. So I'm just going to use a moment here, use the thread cutter on the machine. And it doesn't matter which side we use. The next step I want you to do is do yourself a favor. And just take a moment and safely but quickly dog-ear these corners or cut off that space where those threads crossed a moment ago. And then while we're doing that, I'm not cutting off the actual cross, just south of it, so I can still see it. That gets the bulk out of the way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this nice and secure, and I'm going to grab not the square ruler we used a minute ago. It's not large enough, believe it or not. We need a real long rectangle because I'm going to lay my rectangular ruler from one corner to the next, right where those threads cross, and I'm going to go ahead and cut myself a diagonal line here. And before I do anything, I'm not going to move anything, I'm not going to touch the fabric, I'm not going to check to make sure I made a good cut. I'm just going to lift this up and I'm going to drop it right back down on the opposite two corners, because what we have effectively done, if you've seen my tricks before, we actually just made ginormous, awesome striped half square triangles. Check this out. Okay, so as these start to open up, you're going to get the awesome block unit that I was showing you earlier, right? Pretty cool. And these ones, when they rotate back around, they basically duplicate the others. So we're going to run over to the iron real quick. And I'd like to press these into the solid fabric. It just makes life so much easier. So I'm just going to hold that in the air. I'm going to press it right over onto the solid fabric here like this. We're going to do that for all of the blocks. And then we're going to get them organized, and then we're heading to the design wall, and I will show all of you how to construct this awesome quilt that hasn't even been made yet because it's still sitting here on the table in blocks. So again, the magic of television, isn't it cool? Television. Do any of you kids even know what a television is anymore? They're all called monitors because they're connected to computers. Love it. Okay, so here's the deal. I want you to now look very closely because remember, we did have a bit of a gradient going on. These look just like light blocks, so you don't see the gradient in here. This is awesome, right? You only had 2 fabrics and it looks like you've used like 3 or 4 different colors if you count the black. Backing up. This has got more density of triangles than this side. You're going to get 2 of each. Notice that one is a less dense. This one is a more dense. What I like to do is organize these a more dense, a less dense, a more dense, a less dense, because when I'm building them onto the wall, I'm going to try to kind of get this diagonal opposite effects going. Now, if you're using multiple colors or different kinds of gradients, that's going to show up a lot more in the block work when you have this cool opposites effect. That was one of the keys I did in the original 3 Dudes Modified. But for this, with everything being the same color, it's just going to give us more of a balanced feel and keep that mind's eye from triggering and saying, oh, is it more triangles in one area than the other here as we approach the design side? That's right, I did. I went ahead and finished up all of the blocks for us, and now you too should also have 12 from each of our color families, your light, your medium, and your dark. And as we dive over onto the design wall here, I'm gonna start right in the middle of the project, and I'm gonna start with our lightest fabrics. And if you look at the concept behind it, the colors themselves and the structure, the way I lay them out, kind of form a plus sign. So we're gonna use that as our backup idea for design concept. And I'm gonna come right into the middle and I'm going to start to build that plus sign. Now the plus sign is going to be on point, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of try to get this first, and of course getting the first block on the wall straight is always what's the most challenging, right? So I'm going to get that there, and then I'm going to start to lay this in here. And as I took the blocks off of my stack, I had one of the more dense and one of the less dense right next to each other. So then as I grab the next one, if this is a more dense, light, less dense, right here, I want the more dense, so they're diagonally opposite of each other this way. And then I'm going to be able to drop in this less dense here. And now let's just take a moment and talk about what we see, okay? So here you see that plus sign on point we're starting to develop. These are the lightest colors, and you're gonna also see the amazing thing that happens within those black 1.5 inch strips. It's really, really cool. So we're gonna burn up the rest of our light color fabrics right now by we're gonna grow this way, and we're gonna grow this thing out this way by using the light colors. And now the other orientation, instead of the plus sign, is gonna be kind of a square in a square look. So as I do that, if this is a more dense, this is a less dense, so I'm bringing on a more dense piece. And as I do that now, I'm gonna go ahead and just follow around this kind of what will form a square in a square. More dense. Next one on here is going to be less dense. You're probably picking up it's forming the next plus sign up there. I'm going to do the same to below. Oop. But I didn't get that right, did I? As I stepped back, I noticed it too. You already saw it all. Isn't this a cool block unit the way it forms up here? Okay, so now we're going to go do this side. Nope. There it is. So there you can see what I really mean by the plus sign, that it's forming, right? And isn't that awesome the way that that secondary element of design comes together? Super, super cool. So we're going to move from the light squares. We've already used up all 12 of those now. We're going to then go into our mediums, and we're going to fill in these corners first. I'm going to try to do the same exact concept where I'm using a light and a dark density, or a more and less, excuse me, that's a better term, more and less dense. So again, here was my less dense. So as I take it off of the stack, then this would be a less dense, just keeping the rotation going that way. So that means that I'll do a more dense up here. And now you also really see that square in a square element starting to form. So once you've filled in the corners, now we're going to actually use those mediums on the edges of the light. So they're going to fill into these spaces here as we go. Just watching your densities again. I wanted to get out of the way for a second so you could actually see how all of the colors and the elements of that plus sign are coming back together. And now we're just left with the corners, and the corners are going to be filled with the dark spaces, or the dark block units there. And so there's going to be 3 in each one. And I don't know that it really matters too much on the densities, but I'm just going to keep that same idea alive. Let's see what happens if I can come over here in this corner and show you as well here. So we're going to do 1 here. And then we're just going to carry out that plus sign here. And here. We'll do the same in all of the corners. And just one last one left that I'll stick behind the corner there, behind the stack of fabric, as I begin to pull these off of the wall. So there it is. You can see the entire thing, especially if I get a little bit more out of the way there. And isn't that awesome, the way that those ombre border fabrics work to form all of the different colors you needed all in one strip of fabric? I think that's pretty dang terrific. But what I'm going to need to do now, before I can teach you how to do and calculate your borders, or maybe I should have said calculate and then stitch on your borders, I need to sew all of these together so we can measure. It's going to be a square, which will make our life super easy, but I still need to get them stitched together and measure so we can figure out our borders. So if you'll excuse me, I'll be back in a flash, like I said, and it was super simple. Remember, all you have to do is just go in order and take the blocks and stitch them edge to edge and build all of your blocks until you have rows built. Then take your rows, sew your rows together, matching up where your black solid fabrics come together as your markers each time. You don't even need to use pins. And then basically just press in the favor of the way that it makes your rows to go together easy, and you are set. Now I have the whole quilt top done, and you can hopefully see here that I've put on more of the 1.5 inch black solid border. I needed 5 strips for that. It's been a long video because the quilt measures about 50 inches, and so we needed that little extra, and I just kind of pieced on that little piece as I went on to each of the full-size strips. So we've got that done, and now we're going to do these awesome borders I want to show you. And check this out. So I'm going to use a 3-inch strip now of the ombre, and the leftovers, the darkest portion of the leftovers, that already had the pre-built-in black strips, just for a little bit of extra character. So I've got 3 of those made. I wanted you to see me make the last one. So I've got a 3-inch strip, like I said, here of that wonderful ombre. And then the way I did this here is I first lined up over on this darkest edge, the edge near the selvage. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my ruler, and I'm actually looking at it on the stripes here, making sure it's nice, and I'm going to cheat over just a little bit further. Good. Now we're going to cut that like that, set it aside for later, and then I'm going to spin it, and I'm going to cut myself a perfect 3-inch strip. This is one of those rulers with a 1/2 inch side as well, so I always got to be double checking. Measure twice, cut once. And here we go. 3 inches like that. And then yes, you can do something else with that, but I just didn't feel like technically figuring out how to piece this in as well. So that can truly be set aside for later. And now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take this and the same exact principle right at the selvage, I'm gonna cut off here. And I'm gonna sew these 2 pieces together, and I didn't pay much attention because you can see, I didn't care which way the triangles went because they're gonna be heading in opposite directions. If you were really concerned, of course, make sure that you do them all the same because we're gonna put them on kind of in a windmill fashion here in just a second. All right, so now we're just gonna sew that little seam super easy. Straight across. Take a moment, boy, quilt certainly has grown, hasn't it? And just press this out. And now while this is in my hand, what I want to do is I'm just going to start from any one of my corners, right sides together. I'm just going to lay it out nice like that. And then I'm going to take the dark patchwork side and I'm going to set it up in that top corner. And I'm just going to sew it in to position. And then I'm going to trim off the edge to make it match. You notice that that's my form of measuring and it works terrifically as long as you take it nice and slow at the machine. And like I usually say, let the machine do the work. So really, I'm just gonna set this here and I want everything nice and flat, even before I press it. And I really believe this is one of the keys here, other than having your nice sewing machine working nice. And not only am I reading this line, but I'm also reading the line on the inside, making sure everything lines up nicely there. And now I'm just gonna trim it off like that, leaving that for another quilt, another day. And then I can press this open. Okay, so to be clear, I'm going to sew the opposite border side on, making sure that I have the dark on the opposite corner. So here's my dark over here. So that means I'm gonna start up here like I did before with the dark. That way the borders and the colors match up on the same sides, the same amount of gradient that way. Ooh-wee, that sure turned out amazing if you ask me, and I love the way that variegation worked on the border, don't you? Now, after I throw it on the long arm and machine quilt it all the way from the center out, I will bind it in black also. You can just even tell by my t-shirt, that's gonna be the perfect accent color to finish this off. So again, Raymond Steves, thank you so very much for letting me steal this pattern a million years ago and modifying it again today right here. I have had a blast teaching all of you, especially using the brand new variegated fabric, the Ombre border from the Quintessential line from Michael Miller Fabrics. I have been dying to try this pattern with a variegated fabric that had that edge to edge color change, and this worked perfectly. I'm so glad you got to see it here. Folks, I will be back very soon with another tutorial. Until then, stay safe, happy sewing, and we'll see you real soon. What? Are you actually still here? That's fantastic. Make sure you check out some more of my other fabulous content right here on YouTube. I think it's terrific. Please subscribe while you're there and make sure you hit that little notification bell so you don't miss another moment of the fun.